Hi and welcome to this strategic analysis of the strategic case study pre-scene, the Rio pre-scene for February 2016. My name's Nick Best and I know there's one or two of you who have already been watching all my pre-scene videos and will know who I am, but I also know there's a few of you who have just purchased this pre-scene video analysis. So very quickly, for those of you that don't know me, I'm Nick Best, Managing Director here at Astranti, and I have been teaching this case study for the last 9 years, working with Kaplan, First Intuition, Reed Business School. I've taught this at BPP as well, the final level case study, before then setting up Astranti. And so I've taught this everywhere. I've taught hundreds of people this particular exam, seen lots of different case studies. And what my goal is in this strategic analysis video is to bring all that knowledge of all those different cases and what works and doesn't work in the exam to bear on a strategic analysis of the case. What we're going to be doing is working through all the key E3 strategic analysis models to really understand this exam and how it relates to the Rio case study. What I'm also going to do is remind you of what the models are, only briefly though. I'm going to largely assume knowledge, but with a brief reminder, okay? But secondly, I'm going to focus on how you use the models in the exam and which models are more useful and which models are less useful. Some models we just have because they help us understand the Rio case study more. Other models we can specifically use elements for, and there are certainly some that you can use, some you can't use. And it's always worth bearing in mind the key point that it is very, very rare at strategic case study to be asked to do specific models. You won't get a question saying, do Porter's 540s, do a Pestel analysis. Instead, you are using those to help you to answer your questions. And it can be quite hard at times to know when to use the different models. So I want to give you a bit of guidance on that. But primarily, we're all about analysing Rio and using the models to help us to understand the Rio case. Okay, so Rio then is in the retail industry. It's a very successful company. I'm sure many of you are pleased to see something in the retail industry just because it's something we're all familiar with. We've all shopped, we've all bought clothes. You know, we all know many of the big clothing suppliers in the UK. You know, Superdry, Hollister, Fat Face, Topshop, River Island, and I could go on and on and on, couldn't I? And wherever you are in the world, I'm sure there'll be brands that will be popular in the countries that you are in as well. And Rio is one of those brands. A very successful company, set up in 1990, been growing very, very quickly. And they've got a reputation for fast fashion, which means being able to do a design, really modern, fresh design, get it into the shops very, very quickly, small production quantities, and really attracting young, dynamic customers that are trendy, fashion conscious. They've got motivated staff, good relationships with suppliers, good IT, a great supply chain, a good reputation. There are a lot of strengths. When we come to our SWOT analysis, I've got the most strengths I've ever had in all the SWOT analysis I've done. And I must have done 30 or 40 different SWOT analysis on case studies now. And I've got more strengths in this than any other. It really is a lot. So this is a really good company with not many weaknesses. They've got a distribution centre that's out of date, internet sales. Actually, they grew quite well, but they're still not as high as they perhaps should be. Cost of sales have just increased, which looks a little bit odd given that they're growing, but not that many weaknesses. One thing that really is key is sustainability, and we'll talk about that as a really key part when we get to the corporate social responsibility section of the case. Okay, so that's Rio in summary, but obviously we've got to get into the specific models themselves. So what we're going to be doing is we are going to be using the rational model that you learnt as part of your E3 studies. And the rational model of business strategy then says that over on the right hand side, over here on the future, that we must decide what is our specific goal, what are we trying to achieve, what is our mission, what is our objective. And There isn't a mission actually given in the Rio case study, but what we can do is we can look at the models of mission and think, well, what might it be if there was one? Because that will give us a focus on what the purpose of the business is. What they do have, of course, are very specific objectives, the 5-year plan. Okay, so where does the business want to go? We bring into that the stakeholders simply because it's about dealing and ensuring we meet different stakeholder needs in the future. So who are they? And we'll map those out with a Mendelow's matrix. And we think about governance, and we think about ethics, and very important in this case, corporate social responsibility, something which is really a big focus. So it's about the way we're operating, the values that we're going to have, sustainability, good ethics, excellent values, looking after staff, making sure that suppliers are looking after their staff and so on. This is the way we're going to operate and where we want to go on the right hand side. Then on the left hand side of this, we've got to understand where we are now, because creating a business strategy is like a journey. We know where we want to go, but we actually have to know our current destination to plot the route between the two. And that's what we're doing in this section here. So we'll look at the business environment, we'll look at a pest or pestel analysis. In fact, I will add in the environmental and legal onto the pest analysis there and the 5 forces. Pest generally is about the industry as a whole and the broader business environment, political, economic, social, technical, environmental and legal. And then the Porter's 5 forces is about the specific industry we're operating in, competitive forces, supplier forces, new entrants and so on. And we can look at the profitability of the retail fashion industry. We will do an internal analysis, and actually primarily our internal analysis will be through 2 elements. We will take a look at the value chain now, and usually, as I'm sure you know, there's a value chain in the case itself, and so we'll take a look at that. What we'll also take a look at is the company's SWOT analysis, because that gives us a good idea of their key strengths and weaknesses, the opportunities and threats. SWOT analysis is one of the models that you definitely won't be using in the exam, not directly, but that is an extremely important one, because one thing you will be doing in the exam is making recommendations on new strategies, and you can use the SWOT analysis to help you do that, and I'll show you how to do that. I'll take a look at the product life cycle. I'm not going to take a look at the BCG in this particular exam, simply because, you know, remember the Boston Consulting Group matrix is about portfolio of products, and we're just not given a portfolio in this scenario. Okay, but what we will do is understand where their products are. This is going to help us understand where we are now, so we can then decide how to take the business forward. And we'll look at their generic strategies focused around quality, customer service, design. Okay, we'll then look at Ansos's matrix to look at possible strategies for the future under products and markets, a very useful one in the exam, that one. Generic strategies is a very useful one to use in the exam. Again, I'll talk you through how you can use those in the exam. Methods of growth we've got in there as well. Probably less common, to be fair, in the exam is methods of growth. Okay, but we've got to plot that route, decide of all those options what it is that we're going to do, and that's where I'm going to end up. I'm going to give you, here is the way I would take this forward if I was a director of this business, and we're going to work through that process. So let's start then by looking at the first stage, which is considering the future, the mission, the objectives, the stakeholders, and the governance. Okay. Now, mission itself is really about what the organisation is all about. Why does it exist? Who does it exist for? What are we in business for? It gives us our overriding purpose. And Campbell set out these 4 elements of mission statements that I hope you remember from your studies. And I think what we'll do, we're not given a mission for Rio. So I think what we'll do is I'll remind you of the model, just in case. It could be useful in the exam if there's something mission related. Okay, so I'll remind you of that model. But what I will do, which is probably more important for us, is to take from the case what we think their mission might be. Why is this important? Simply because it helps us focus on where they're going, what they're trying to do, what the most important elements of the business are. And so the first thing is the purpose. Why does the organisation exist? Whom does it exist for? And there's no doubt that it exists for its investors. The Rita set this business up. She is one of the key investors, 20% ownership, a very, very important stakeholder. Like, it partly exists for her because she set it up, for herself as an entrepreneur. But then the other investors as well, of course. We have a large proportion of institutions who own shares in this business. And of course, therefore, we must deliver a return. And we did see that they did pay dividends in the last year of €100 million. So they are delivering the return there. We've also seen that the share price has risen in the case. So investors are doing okay at the moment. You could argue that I think that if I was writing a mission, I'd say it was there for customers, about giving customers fashionable clothes. And so really I would say those two. You could put in there people like staff and suppliers, but I think primarily investors and customers would be the two key ones if I was going to write a mission. What does the organisation hope to achieve long term? Well, we are given our 5-year plan, and in that 5-year plan, number of stores is going to go up from 976 to 1,676. That is a huge expansion. And they're focused on doing it in a sustainable way. And so that combination then of big expansion, sustainability is a driving force for where this business is going. Now, in the exam then, you can come back to this as a key focus. When you are recommending strategies, recommend things that are going to be consistent with that long-term plan, firstly, that's going to support that level of growth. Secondly, recommend things that are sustainable. If you think that there's a strategy that's not going to support sustainability and good for the environment and good social responsibility, you shouldn't be recommending those. So the mission is driving what you're doing. The other question you've got when you're making recommendations, does it support customers and does it support investors? Is it giving you a return for investors? Is it going to give you that fast fashion, fashionable clothes delivered very quickly of a high quality? If it's not, then you shouldn't be going ahead. So you can use these points to guide your decision making in the exam. Okay, and that's mostly where you're going to find this stuff useful. And I've already really mentioned the strategy. What is their strategy? It is high quality, the latest fashion, great customer service, expanding throughout the world. Okay, that's how they're hoping to compete and grow. And again, those are 3 qualities that you must review against the possible issues and strategies in the exam to make sure they continue to be relevant. Some of the values that we're given in the exam, what the organisation stands for. Quality is one, fashionable, trendy, that's another. Sustainability and ethics come in as well. So we have got some good strong values given, and again we must be consistent with those. Not many specific policies talked about. There is of course the supplier code of conduct, which of the code of conduct for the suppliers, things like treatment of staff and so on. And so making sure that people abide by that come in there. So those are the 4 elements of typical mission statements, and certainly the first 3 of those, we've got a lot of information in the case. If we were going to write one, we could easily create something from that. Okay. Now I've brought in here performance measurement. The reason is that objectives, which is what we're really focusing on in this part of the case study, links through to performance measurement. Sort of what are our areas of targets, and we are given some targets under the 5-year plan. What I want to really focus on here are how are we going to measure the performance of the business as those 5 years go forward. Okay, so you set objectives under these headings and then you measure performance going forward. Now, I do think balanced scorecard is a very important model. The reason is, in this particular exam, the reason it was mentioned as part of the case. You may remember staff are appraised according to a balanced scorecard model. That would make me assume it's used throughout the organisation. Therefore, considering what these balanced scorecard headings are and how to use them really is key. So some of these points I've taken directly out the case. Others I've filled them in from ideas that I've got in terms of how we would measure performance in this type of business. Let's go through our 4 headings. Now remember, there's 4 headings in the balanced scorecard, and the theory goes is that in the past many organisations have only focused on the financial perspective, They've driven very, very much towards profit and return on investment. That's the profit divided by the investment that's put in, or the capital employed. And that's driven short-termism, because everyone's after the late profits this year and profits next year, and each year is profit, profit, profit. And sometimes profits have been put in the forefront, not the long term, not internal efficiencies and productivity, not innovation and learning, and not focusing on the customers and customer needs. And those three elements, internal perspectives, creates efficiencies in the business and good operations that's good for the long term. Innovation gives you new products, trains people up, and that's good in the long term. Keeping customers happy is good in the long term as well. And so therefore the theory goes is that a balanced approach to measuring performance considers all these elements. So on the financial perspective, the other one that I've considered here is cash flow. They are particularly important in this business because they are expanding very quickly, therefore using a lot of cash flows as part of that expansion program, and we want to make sure that they've always got enough cash to survive. So cash flow and doing cash flow budgets and reviewing against those, an important measure. Next we'll look at the internal perspective. Here we look at internal productivities, and one thing that we can consider from a manufacturing point of view, because 30% is internally produced, is the average time per unit produced. That's a good measure of productivity. Wastage rates and recycling rates was something that was mentioned in the case as part of the CSR report, and so that we know that is something that they measure and they think is important, and therefore definitely something, particularly as part of the manufacturing operation that they've got, that they want to make sure that they improve on, and they've got a real focus on improving in that area. We can look at measures such as revenue generated per staff member is an element of efficiency. Do we generate revenue per the number of staff that we've got? Actually a figure we can work out from the case, which has improved in the last year, because we're given the number of full-time equivalent staff members, something we did as part of the earlier analysis that we did on the pre-scene. Revenue per square metre is a very common measure in the retail industry, because it shows you how much revenue you're generating for the amount of store space, and therefore again a good measure of efficiency. And then a couple of others come from the CSR section. The carbon efficiency, which has improved in the last year, breaches of the supplier code. We know those are important topics and goals for them, and those goals are specifically given to us. When it comes to innovation and learning, revenues from new products developed is always a good one to test whether we're bringing new products in efficiently. Hours spent on training activities tells us about the amount of learning that's going on, and that we hope to see that improving. Number of new stores opened tells us about growth, particularly innovation in terms of new countries, moving into new countries. Number of changes made from the feedback. We do get a lot of feedback from customers, staff, suppliers, and therefore again that's about new, that's about change, that's about innovation, and we know because they give that kind of feedback that that is something that would be important to them. As far as customers are concerned, footfall is one measure that they do. We know that in the case they actually definitely measure the number of customers entering the store. Obviously the more the better. It shows that the brand is recognised, that the marketing is going well, that people like the clothes. It's a very good generic measure of how popular the company is. We could measure things like number of complaints, customer satisfaction from surveys, and we know that they do surveys. So there we have a whole range of different measures, and if we measure all those elements, we'll get a balanced performance and a balanced perspective on the business's performance. In terms of the 5-year plan, what are they planning and what are we given? Well, we have got goals in relation to the number of new stores, which the goal is to go from 976 to 1676. And so big growth plans there. In terms of the profits, the goal is to go from an operating profit of 2015 of 401 million. Let's put that in euros as well. To an operating profit of 973. And so they have got big plans for revenue and profit growth, and we've got the specific goals under the 5-year plan in there. We've also got some goals over profit margins, which we might want to put in here as well. I'll pop one of those in too. Let's pop it in just here. So in terms of margins then, they want to go from 56.3% gross margin to 58.3%. And they've got the operating profit 15.7 to 18.2. So there are some very specific goals over 5 years that they are working towards in this particular case. Down on carbon efficiency, there's a goal of 80% renewable energy. So that links into carbon efficiency as a specific measure. And as far as code of conduct breaches, their goal is a maximum of 10 in 2 years. So we can see they've got some specific goals. They've probably actually got goals under a lot of the other ones as well, just not told about them in the case. So a balanced view would give you a balanced perspective on all of these measures, and it would drive the business's performance forward very effectively. So if you're now watching the sample version that's on YouTube or on the Ostranti website, this is where the sample ends. I hope you've enjoyed this first 20 minutes of the video. The video itself goes on well over 120 minutes, I think about 125 minutes in total. Going through, on that we go through all the other models, all the key ones like 5 forces, Pastel, SWOT, ANSOS matrix and so on, and I tell you about how we can use those in the exam. I hope, having seen this sample, you found it useful and think that the rest of this video will be useful as well. Do remember as well, this is just one of a whole series of videos about Rio. I go through the whole case study, page by page by page, explaining in detail what each of those elements mean, and bringing my knowledge and experience to bear on how I would interpret that case and what it means for you in your exam. Then we've got our top 10 issues list, where I go through my top 10 issues, the most likely ones I think to come up, and talk about how and what I think you need to do to prepare for those issues should they come up in your exam. And then the industry video, I summarise our industry pack, actually a high-level summary of a very detailed industry pack examining the industry, but also giving you specific industry examples that you can bring up and use in the exam. Remember, one thing you must do is learn industry examples and know where you're going to use them and how to use them, because that gets you really good marks, and that, of course, could be the difference between you passing and failing. 5 of those really great industry examples used on exam day, and that could be what gets you through. So again, that's really, really important you get those industry examples. Okay, so as I say, I hope you found this one useful, and I hope you decide to go on and purchase the rest of the video series and all of our other material as well. And best of luck in your exams.